In this recorded lecture, we are going to look into the status of education in our country in the midst of calamity and assess initially the merit of our system in place to prepare students for an alternative learning whenever possible. At the beginning of every semester, professors customarily spend time addressing the syllabus and getting hold of students' expectation. This is also the most opportune time to discuss contingencies. The professor certainly prefers a mode of instruction, but must back his resources up with contingencies of delivery when disaster strikes and schools close. Addressing the syllabus is crucial and likened to the stating of a promise. The instructor will deliver the goods no matter what, if it means mitigating disruption and continuity. Every course must highlight continuity and devise proactive measures to maintain the delivery of quality instruction. That responsibility is shared across everyone enrolled in a college course as much as it is shouldered primarily by the teacher. In adult education setting, the students are expected to be goal-oriented and direct their focus in how they will be able to optimize their learning or help the instructor achieve his instructional goals for the class. Negotiating learning with the instructor is nothing new. It is one way of helping professors ensure that everyone is learning. While students have already acquired the skills of critical thinking and creative thinking, they will be able to suggest the best ways to conduct classroom instruction. Given that most of the contemporary 21st century learners are tech savvy, they will be able to suggest a more efficient way of learning through computer or smartphone mediation. The latter is not a novel pedagogical idea. B.F. Skinner, a professor of psychology at Harvard University, helped develop a teaching machine in mid-1920s which used mechanical devices to deliver either a multiple choice or an arithmetic problem. The machine shows a prompt or printed text in a text window. The prompt may present a sentence to parse or an arithmetic equation to solve. The learner writes the answer to the prompt on an exposed strip of paper. Then afterwards, he drives the machine to show the correct response. The same with computers today. The teaching machine offered immediate response whether the learner got the answers right or wrong. Immediate and rapid correction stimulated the concentration and made the response process pleasurable. Skinner reported a high level of enthusiasm and the ability of students to move at their own pace. In fact, e-learning has significantly developed across the years, seeing that the computer-mediated learning can now be done through mobile technology and even through Android and iOS technology. The new technical systems are now addressing flexibility of access to information related to learning and instruction. It has liberated the community of learners from restrictions of movement and space in the traditional instruction. With the learner hooked up in the internet, he is in both virtual and real environments at the same time, prompting a ubiquitous learner, so to speak, regardless of time and space. Questions derived from the real world can now be answered through the virtual world, accessing the World Wide Web, or through collaborative social media like twittering or posting online. The smart applications installed on mobile devices are handy and a perfect contingency plan. However, the society has found its ultimate disadvantage at the time of calamities and national disasters: the difficulty of internet-ready devices and SIM cards to access the network. Profoundly experienced during such times. This is due primarily to infrastructure damage and inability of networks to communicate with respect to one another. However, this concern is even predated by the controversial digital divide, a term coined by Larry Irving. With the changes in social demographics, the original meaning of the term, which was the gap between those who have access to and those who have no access to information and communication, has shifted to those who have more bandwidth and those who have less. Occasionally, the divide is between with skills and without skills pertaining to the use of the internet or a device. Based on observation, people are stuck with the idea of the original meaning of digital divide. Third world countries struggle to maintain equality and narrow the gap between the privileged and the less privileged because of political instability and the lack of economic power to address the underlying problems of poverty. The poverty problem extends to the availment of technology. This means that the digital capacity can only bear fruit for the privileged who can afford a stable private network and computing devices. There are countless number of ways to address the digital divide, and the most productive one is the renaming of the term into digital inclusion, which has three aspects: availability and affordability, that's the first. Second, digital literacy, and lastly, application. In universities across the nation, regardless of stature, students should be able to avail of the maximum benefits of information from the online world in order to be effective decision makers of the future. However, this is met with perplexity as the task of boosting ICT skills in the country is set back by unavailability and insufficiency of resources. However, the worldwide data that Martin Helbert studied from 1986 to 2010 showed that access to information and communication are already in the stage of universalization, and by implication, the use of mobile devices can be construed as already penetrating most of the social demographics, regardless of being poor or rich. The observation of universalization extends to this data. What is accounted for in the statistics in the Philippine settings, the outlook of 107.3 million total population with 124.2 million subscription to mobile devices, or 116%. Understandably, the numbers dip down in terms of active social media users, which has 76 million users, or 71% of the population. The data show the ubiquity of mobile devices that soon will show how much high will be the population invested in mobile technology in 5 years' time. And it will be interesting to see how the government will nudge to the direction of digitalization by then. More and more people worldwide are now having access to information and communication ever since the invention of SIM cards in 1991. It had revolutionized how people send their messages. The basic features the SIM had offered began with single text messages and group messages that today are known as group chats. There was an attempt to integrate the SIM technology through its simple application feature in education, but issues arise as our country grapple with uncertainty and ambivalence about cellular technology, sometimes unproven. Studies regarding cellular phones' impact on moral values, intelligence, and psychological health are also the reasons for partiality towards this technology. But despite what behavioral sciences advised, we are now reaching at 95% digital incursion in the society based on global trend because of mobile phones. Of course, the trend is only a baseline that tells the world that digitalization is becoming our new black box. The biggest story is how digitalization and the internet would pick up in struggling countries. The building of network infrastructure and the affordability of its services will depend on the capacity of the government to provide either a free subscription or a government controlled preferential subscription for the underprivileged. During disasters, the digital age seems to freeze, and people naturally go back to traditional, regardless of the necessity or the inevitability of induced digital blackout during calamities and pandemic like the coronavirus. A sustained blackout without seeking options to find alternatives is adversarial to the goal of sustainable development. The Sustainable Development Goals challenge is resiliency and continuity in times of crisis. That goes for education as well. Education has a lot of options today compared to World War period, thanks to the synergism of educational technology experts who integrated the e-learning system, or now famously called learning management system. If not for socio-political problems in the Philippines, it has the potential to mitigate the current predicament in the continuity of learning. There is a huge roadblock, however, at the educational foreground right now in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, where countries that are affected resorted to temporary suspension of classes. This could last for a few months by optimistic estimation, or worse, it may last a year. Quality education is also gravely impacted in this time of crisis, devoiding the Philippines and other affected third world countries to adequately achieve its sustainability goal pertaining to quality education. The solution is at hand, but the sectors of government, education, and community should cooperate and work together to uphold the use of technology in disaster proofing education. Disaster proofing must be done in the event that schools cannot continue to open. The learning management system automatically becomes the default instructional module. This functions as a message board and a monitoring for distantly located students. But the system should already be integrated in the typical classroom for it to work during disaster. The instructor will facilitate its implementation in class and must resort to the easiest and most practical ways for students to operate. This is a way to accustom students to a multimodal instruction and avoid reluctance and negative perception. Instructors are content developers, so they are in charge of curating educational materials in the learning management system and to ensure decorum in holding different online activities using the system. Sometimes these online activities are misunderstood as limited to live chats and video conferencing. Furthermore, calling the alternative learning as online excludes the other e-learning modes like the basic text messaging. Oftentimes, the simplest seems ridiculous, but in dire situation, it might be the only sound solution. Some may have overlooked the blending of offline and online and have underappreciated online scheduling, which only works if the professor really had prepared for a disaster-proof teaching. The term online class may not be accurate in terms of what is actually and commonly practiced. Email is the most convenient and low data method of communicating with students because oftentimes it is mostly comprised of text. By the looks of it, most of the instructors who are not yet in the learning management system are sending emails manually if they have the email addresses of their students in their rosters. Emails are asynchronous, which means the recipients can respond anytime they are connected to the internet. It is also the least threatening and the most friendly in terms of individual pacing. In times of a pandemic where students may have a poor access to the network and only depend on a ration of mobile data, the basic proactive solution is the old-fashioned email. That is the bare minimum that an instructor can demand, requiring only 75 kilobits without media attachments. In the name of disaster proofing, the education sector must also step up measures by asking the National Telecommunications Commission and the internet providers to tap routers for a free internet service in designated communities for the duration of a community quarantine. Schools must also have their own measures in dealing with students who don't have devices. Being a disaster-prepared nation not only means prepping up the health, military, police, government agencies, and media sector. And during disasters and community outbreak, the concern for education must always be addressed by a more complex and not immoderate measures. If education will be disaster-proof, a lot of measures will be in place with the outlook of mitigating risks and upholding quality instruction. With this in place at the beginning of the semester, professors will not just address the syllabus, but will need to address the disaster preparedness of the course by specifying and defining the protocol during such circumstances, like in that of earthquake and fire drills. People tend to forget that technology is the solution to unique problems. Poor investments in technology may prove to lessen the human capital and productivity. The creative solution for any gaps is at hand, and it begins with rethinking what education is in the midst of crisis, how it can persist, and what new roles will a teacher play in this unanticipated circumstance.